Hello coaches and welcome to this edition of Give and Go Live. My name's David Newbury. I'm the e-learning coordinator for United Soccer Coaches, and I'm joined as usual by my colleague Ian Barker. Hello Ian.
Hello David, pleasure to be here.
So Ian, today's topic, we're going to look at an attacking focused activity and specifically looking at attacking and support. Here we have a full-size field, and in the field we have a central box that is the width of the field minus 8 yards on each side, and the length from the D at one end to the D at the other. So quite a large midfield area. We also then have, for this particular setup, 11 versus 11, we have actually 10 players on each team. The Reds have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in attack against 10 whites, because whites have possession. So the team in possession has all 10 players in the box. The team out of possession, defending, have the 2 red players. Defenders drop out of the zone. And as you'll see, at each end we have an end zone, and the objective for the team in possession is to make 5 consecutive passes and then penetrate out of the end zone, out of the central box, and then attack the end zone. So Ian, let's talk about methods.
Sure, there's a couple of things about this activity I like. Certainly towards the end of training, we want to end up with shots at goal and penetration into the final third for strikes at goal. But right now, the end zones reflect possession to get into certain territory. So that's an important understanding of where this might fit into the training. This would be probably the penultimate big activity before going to goal. Some of our basic principles of play here. The first player to receive the ball identifies that, in this case, support is behind them, and they choose to play a pass the way they're facing for a good supporting position, good supporting angle. We also see that we have players offering width, and ultimately some players offering width and mobility potentially higher. So our principles of play for attack are solid. A couple of things that are diagrammed here quite nicely is the notion of a forward pass and then occasionally a corresponding drop pass to then play forward again. So sometimes this rhythm of up, back, forward, I think is worth pointing out here. Also, our movement arrows suggest that players are moving to receive the ball, and they're not all standing still and holding, maintaining positions. And then finally, in this case, this penetrating pass is weighted for the movement and timing of the run. So hopefully this is a coordinated movement. And we would then start to consider offside as a condition to make sure the timing patterns here are solid. So from the point of view of attacking principles of play, big numbers penetrating into attacking space, I really like what we see here in this first diagram.
And Ian, as we're on this diagram, let's talk about one of the rules or conditions that we place at the beginning, which is the 4 players in the defending line remaining in the back half or the defensive half of the grid with 2 midfield players. So to begin with, both teams should retreat to at least having 6 players in their defensive end, which would allow a 6 versus 2 initially to build out from the back.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, in any decent training, we want to allow for some success and then make it increasingly more complex. So we want to have a number of successful repetitions before we start layering in increasing challenge.
So in sequence 2, we've continued the play, and the whites have managed to make their 5 consecutive passes, or whatever the number of passes that the coach requires, and then they've penetrated out. But with that penetration, 2 of the white players have now left the grid, and we've created a 2 versus 2 situation with the objective of the white team to dribble or pass the ball so that they can stop the ball in the end zone. Of course, we could also go to goal.
Some of the things I think are diagrammed nicely here is the activity now allows for supporting runs from the deep midfield into the attacking area. So this is important as we get going, and actually make sure, coaches, that we're encouraging our back 4 as well to jam up the field, because it's not enough to play the ball to our forwards and then sort of stand there and admire our passes. So we certainly want to see that. I like also the diagramming here of this pass into the wide right player, which inevitably is going to draw the attention of the Reds. It's going to draw people into this area, either physically or certainly with their attention. But what we can see is this movement off the ball on the blind side by this fairly astute left winger. So I think that is captured nicely in this particular activity. And once again, if we can honor offside condition, then these timing patterns become increasingly more realistic with players probably 12, 13 on up.
Ian, on the face of it, some of these conditions are quite complex and add extra complexity to it. We've got a condition, for example, of the number of players that can enter from the defensive end into the attacking end. We also have a restriction on the number of players that can be in any particular half. What's your thoughts on how we add those conditions?
Well, in general, I like conditions like this. So what I would first do is I'd make sure that players knew their functional role. So your right and left fullback. So when I'm addressing who can go and when they can go, the players know what their positions are. So typically it's going to be our two central midfielders, let's say, are going to be the people that are going to join into the attacking half. So I'd like to build in the functionality of that. The other part of it is that, let's say, for whatever reason, this is not the player who is ideally the choice of support. So with the ability to communicate, maybe we release a fullback and a midfielder stays. So now the players can start to make decisions around these game conditions based on what they see and what they read. So for a while, it might be the two central midfielders go, but after a while, I'm going to start saying, you can choose who are the two best players to support this attack. So these game conditions set up our training and help us with identifying patterns and opportunities when we get to our final unconditioned game.
And the third and final sequence, the coach has now re-entered the ball. So once the ball is scored or the ball goes out of play, the coach will now restart. And in this case, have restarted by passing the ball to the Reds. As that ball is entering the area, the two players that were outside of the zone on the Red team come in, and the two defenders for the White drop out. So we create again this 10 versus 8 situation inside of the box. Ian, methods.
Yeah, so as you've very well done here on the bottom of the screen, there are ways to obviously make this activity increasingly more challenging or less challenging, depending on the level of player, the numbers you have, and so on and so forth. And of course, the ultimate one is to get to adding goals and goalkeepers. And so these become strikes at goal as opposed to penetrations into the end zone. I think the way this activity is set up, where now the ball is played into our Red team and we're encouraging the Red backs to step up and we're asking the White backs to drop off, is pretty realistic. That's sort of what we're going to see in a good competitive youth game, senior game. So the activity is not drill-like. For me, it remains an activity with a lot of game realism, but using the box, the central midfield box, filling it with players and balancing out in terms of realism in the game, where one team will probably have numerical advantage, makes a ton of sense. Suggested here, this passing sequence with up back, there's the back, and then switch out the other side. Perfectly reasonable pass for a run. Those types of patterns should occur. But if you feel like you're not being overly successful, just manipulate the numbers and give increasing advantage to the attacking team so they can find their gaps and spaces initially before you increase the challenge.
And Ian, in terms of the functionality and the formation that the coach plays, it might be worth considering actually including the width of the field, particularly if you're playing 4 across the middle, 5 across the middle, or even 4 across the back line. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because sometimes we look at these diagrams and we get very bent out of shape about dimensions and spaces. So potentially we can make the end zone, if we're on a full field, the penalty box. You just got to penetrate into the 18 yards. So you've got to get within 18 yards of the opposing goal, but anywhere across the field. Equally so, we could say penetrate within the width of the penalty box, which would be 1-on-1. In this case, good numbers around the ball, but maybe we allow players to operate in the wide spaces in possession for free, and only when they receive it can opponents come out. So there's a number of different ways you can manipulate, but the idea is this would be a team training theme into the attacking third, and we certainly want our players to have their functional responsibilities. So this is not something for 9s and 10-year-olds where they're probably playing a ton of different positions. You certainly want the key players that play the key positions in the key spaces in this activity.
Well, thank you very much, Ian, and thank you, coaches, for joining us on this edition of Give and Go Live.